Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. This is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, a lecturer of philosophy at Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies Cust. The course I'm teaching you is called Introduction to Philosophy, and the course code is PHI 101. This is lecture number 20, and today we are going to look into the epistemic theories. What are the different theories of epistemology in philosophy which explain the nature of knowledge?
Now, these are the outlines. Today we will discuss what is idealism, the different types of idealism, and we will uh, discuss in detail Berkeley's idealism. We will also discuss materialism and empiricism as well. Now, what is idealism? So, students, generally we use the word ideal, which gives us a sense of idealism as well. Uh, that designate qualities of perfection, desirability, and excellence. But in philosophy, we have a very specific use of the term ideal. Now, what is idealism? You must remember, students, that basically there are two philosophies. One is idealism and the other is materialism. All other philosophies are the offshoot of these basic two philosophies. We have idealism. In idealism, we will discuss those different types like objective idealism, subjective idealism, absolute idealism. Uh, we have religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So all these religious points of view are also idealistic in nature if we define idealism in a very broad way. We have different types of materialism, like we have Marx dialectical materialism, we have mechanism. So let's come to the basic idea. What is idealism? According to Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, idealism is a philosophical doctrine that reality is somehow mind correlative or mind coordinated, that the real objects constituting the external world are not independent of cognizing minds, but exist only as in some way correlative to mental operations. So, from this definition, the central theme of this definition is that the external world we know is actually totally mind dependent. It is not independent of the perceiver, it is not independent of the mind. So, all we know about the external world, according to idealism, is actually mind dependent. So, for idealism, ideas are the primary source of knowledge. Idea is the primary source of knowledge, and for them, what is ideal, it is real as well. Next, we have the different types of idealism. Basically, we divide idealism into two basic categories, that is epistemological idealism and metaphysical idealism. Now, what is epistemological idealism? Epistemological idealism means that some idealism when it is related to epistemology or knowledge. So, epistemological idealism claims something mental is the ultimate foundation of all knowledge. So, it means that the primary source of knowledge is actually something mental. So, ideas are the primary source of knowledge. For example, uh, for the existence of a marker, it is very much necessary that first of all a person should have an idea about that particular marker. When one has that idea, that idea is further invested or incorporated in the matter, and then the existence of marker become possible. So idealists think like this. But for a materialist, it is very much necessary that first that material should be present, and then a person may have an idea about that particular thing. So it is just like a chicken egg paradox. I'm using chicken egg paradox in a very metaphorical sense, not in the scientific sense. In science, there is a theory that whether the chicken came first or the egg came first. Nowadays, in modern biology, it is believed, according to evolutionism, it is the egg that came into being first. Next, it is further we explain epistemological idealism. Although the existence of something independent of the mind is conceded, everything that we can know about this mind independent reality is held to be so permeated by the creative, formative, or constructive activities of the mind that all claims to knowledge must be considered in some sense to be a form of self knowledge. So, again, in this definition, we have that central theme that it is actually the mind that applies its categories, applies its applies its formative nature, and then we are able to know about something. So, for idealism, it's the mind, it's the ideas that makes our knowledge possible. The second is metaphysical idealism. So, according to metaphysical idealism, it is a belief in a spiritual principle at the basis of the world. They think that there is a belief, a spiritual principle that is working in the basis of the world. Like in religion, we have God, or there may be some supernatural force, without the reduction of the physical world to a mere illusion. So, they also think this is actually the definition given by Rice in the spirit of modern philosophy. They also think that the physical world should not be reduced to an illusion, but we must keep in mind behind this physical world there is a spiritual principle, an ideal principle, a principle that is ideal in nature, that is not material in nature. We have some example of metaphysical idealism like Plato world of forms, as we have already discussed in the previous lecture. If you remember, Plato world of forms, this world and the other world, as Plato considered this world as the replica of that real world, that is the world of forms or the world of ideas or the world of souls or the world of universal, we may call it. We also have a type of metaphysical idealism in different religions like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, in which we have some basic notions about God, angels, some supernatural beings. So, all those concepts are actually, all those notions constitutes metaphysical idealism. Now, what are the further types of idealism? If philosophically we have subjective idealism, objective idealism, and absolute idealism. So, according to subjective idealists, the world consists of only of minds and their contents. So, among those subjective idealists, we have the famous Irish bishop, the famous Irish philosopher George Berkeley, whose idealism is a best example of this kind of idealism that is known as subjective idealism. And Berkeley actually refuted the external world. Berkeley refuted the previous held views about the external world. And there is a famous dictum of George Berkeley that says to be is to be pursued. Now, what does it mean? Actually, he means over here that whatever exists, it must be pursued. In other words, whatever exists, it must be in the mind of a perceiver. So, without the mind of a perceiver, nothing exists. The external world is totally dependent on the mind of a perceiver. So, if there is no perceiver, there is no external world as well. Now, let's analyze it further. I'll try my level best to explain it in a very simple thought experiment or in a very simple. So, here is the diagrammatically, I would like to show it with a diagram, and you see this apple. As far as in order to know about this apple, first of all, light falls on this apple, then it is reflected back, and it falls on our retina in the eyes, and the retina transduce that particular physical energy into a kind of neural impulse. and then a message is sent to the brain, and we call it as red. Now, this we have another sensory organs like hearing. When we drop this apple, we will hear a particular sound. So it means that dropping this apple will produce a particular sound. We have a particular smell of this apple as well, though it's in a virtual reality, it's not in real world. We have touch. When we touch it, suppose if it seems hard, so we will say it's hard. It's hard. And we have a test as well. Suppose if I taste it or you taste it, and if it tastes sweet, we will say it's sweet. Now, in order to know about this apple, there are some sensory organs involved, and we have already discussed in the previous lecture what is sensation and what is perception. This whole manifold of sense data, when it is sent to the brain, it is called sensation. When the brain applies its own, the mind applies its own categories on this manifold of the sense data, then it is called perception. So now again we have this brain. Now, as far as this apple is concerned, Berkeley thinks that this apple is nothing more than these qualities which are totally dependent on our sensory organs. Now, suppose if I put all these qualities in the brain, so students, you must remember brain has a different connotation and mind has a different. So mind is something which is not spatial, which doesn't occupy any time and space. Mind is an abstract notion, but for the sake of convenience, I am putting here an image. So now, what is that apple apart from all these qualities? Berkeley thinks if there is a perceiver and a perceiver is perceiving this apple, so nothing exists outside. This apple is totally dependent on the mind of a perceiver. If there is no perceiver, there is no apple. Now, for example, if I close my eyes and so there would be no apple for me. But again, the question arises: does that apple disappear in the actual world? Berkeley says it doesn't disappear because there are some other perceiver. They are perceiving this apple. If suppose they close their eyes, does it disappear again? So Berkeley thinks it doesn't disappear because all those things which exist in our world, they are actually perceived by the greatest mind, that is the mind of God. He was actually referring to God, the infinite ego. Now, in the previous slide, if you think, those qualities which are known as secondary qualities by John Locke and there must be something as well apart from those qualities that is really nature. So John Locke thinks that there is something known as substratum, and for Immanuel Kant it is noumena, thing in itself. These terms actually refers to thing in itself, that there is something which inheres all these qualities which are totally dependent on our sensory organs. Now, what about the external world? There was a question raised that Berkeley idealism is a kind of dogmatic idealism. If we agree with Berkeley, so the whole external world will disappear. So the Berkeley is underestimating the real nature of the external world. Berkeley thinks actually this world is existing and there is a continuity and order in this world due to the infinite ego or infinite mind, that is the mind of God. Next to it, we have an objective idealism. According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, the Hegelian philosophy of the absolute mind, or any one of the group of metaphysical idealism deriving primarily from Hegel, which affirms that fundamental reality is an all-embracing spiritual unity. Students, really difficult philosophy, and honestly speaking, it's not included in your course contents, but as a type, I tell you briefly that the absolute idealism refers to the philosophy of Hegel, in which there is a concept of absolute mind. The absolute mind is knowing itself through those finite minds. And we have also transcendental idealism. Transcendental idealism, also called as formalistic idealism, the term applies to the epistemology of the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who held that the human self or transcendental ego constructs knowledge out of sense impression and from universal concept called categories that it imposes upon them. So, as we discussed in the previous slides, and I gave that example of Apple, so there are two things for Immanuel Kant. One is phenomena and the other is noumena. As far as noumena is concerned, so noumena cannot be noun. We don't know about the real, the thing in itself. It is unknowable. And for Locke, that was substratum. For Locke has the same views about substratum. It is unknowable. So, according to Immanuel Kant, that which is known as transcendental idealism, some of the aspects of reality is transcendental in nature, which means it's beyond our mental capacity. We don't know about that particular part of the reality, that is thing in itself or noumena. Why? Because for Kant, our mind is like a net in which those big fish are trapped, but the small fish goes through that small holes. We cannot comprehend the whole of the reality. There is some missing part of the reality. And for Berkeley, actually, Berkeley take this notion of noumena, because if noumena is something that cannot be known or understood, so why should we believe in something that cannot be known or understood? Or how we come to know about something that is unknowable? This is a very basic question, and this is one of the criticism of Berkeley on those philosophers like Kant or John Locke. Next to it, we have materialism. According to materialism, matter is the prime reality and also a source of our knowledge. So matter is the basic stuff of reality. It's the primary stuff of the reality of the world. So we have different types of materialism, like objectivism. We have scientific objectivism, a theory in which we objectively verify different types of knowledge. Science has its own methodology, and that has its own methods. Through those methods, what is objectively verified, we call it objectivism. We have dialectical materialism. It refers to the philosophy of Karl Marx, the historical materialism or the scientific materialism. We have mechanism. We have epiphenomenalistic materialism. We have physicalistical materialism and eliminative materialism. These are the types which will be discussed later on. Lastly, we have empiricism. So empiricism is a kind of materialism. According to empiricism, all our knowledge is obtained from the external world through sensory experiences. So those sensory experiences play a very crucial part in the acquisition of knowledge. Through sensory experiences, we know about the external world. So we have different sensory organs. Through those sensory organs, we acquire knowledge from the external world. And further, this empiricism is divided into two basic types of empiricism: classical empiricism and modern empiricism. We will discuss John Locke in modern empiricism in detail. Lastly, we have the outcomes of this lecture. So in this lecture, students, we discussed what is idealism, what are the different types of idealism, and we discussed Berkeley theory of idealism, that is to be pursued. Whatever exists in this world, that is actually totally mind dependent. It is if there is no perceiver, there is no external world in a sense. We also discussed Hegel philosophy and Kant phenomenalism. For Kant, the reality, whatever we know the phenomena only. We don't know about the noumena, the part that is non-thing in itself, about any object. So, for example, I have given that example of an apple. So, we know about the phenomena of the apple, those qualities which are transmitted to our brain through sensory organs, but we don't know about the noumena, the real thing, which inheres all these qualities, the real apple. So, we also discussed materialism, and we will discuss empiricism in the coming lectures in detail. So, these are the references that Plato's Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and we have in the previous lecture we discussed Edmund Getter cases. You must read what is knowledge and what are the different epistemic theories about knowledge. A very good book of John Hosper's, An Introduction to Philosophical Analysis. Thank you very much indeed.